everyone, welcome back to my channel for a brand new mystery with Molly. If you are new around here, if you've never seen my face on your screen before, then hi, my name is Molly and I post true crime videos like this every single week. So if you think that is something that you might want to stick around for, then please do subscribe and don't forget to switch on the little notification bell so that YouTube will let you know whenever I post a new video. This week we are going to be talking about a solved case from California when a beautiful young nurse was found brutally murdered in her own home. Police seemed to jump to the conclusion that her death was the result of a robbery gone wrong. She died whilst confronting a burglar or burglars who were trying to steal from her. But despite quickly establishing what they believed was the motive behind this homicide, the case soon went cold and remained unsolved for years and years. However, decades after the crime, advancements in forensic science revealed groundbreaking evidence, a bombshell in the investigation, as detectives were faced with the realization that everything they thought they knew about this murder was incorrect. Eventually, a top suspect finally emerged in the case, and with that came a second shocking realization that the person responsible for this sickening killing was actually one of their own, which forced people to question whether police negligence and a possible cover-up within the force was the reason why this individual was able to get away with murder for more than a quarter of a century. Join me as we delve into the horrific case of Sherri Rasmussen. But quickly before we get into the case, I would just like to say a big thank you to Angry Birds Dream Blast for very kindly sponsoring this section of the video. Now, if you are looking for the perfect game to play for when you just want to relax and unwind after a long day, then look no further because this is the game for you. Angry Birds Dream Blast is a casual mobile game where you join the adorable young Angry Birds on an adventure through a beautiful dream world. It challenges your puzzle skills with fun levels. There are literally thousands of levels to play in the game with many different themed events, so you'll never get bored. And it's super simple to play. You just pop groups of 2 or more bubbles and start making your way to the end. And what makes Angry Birds Dream Blast different to other matching puzzle games is that the bubbles are free-falling and not confined to a square box. And like I said, there are dozens of themed events in the game to keep it fresh and engaging. So this month, for example, you can unlock Easter events and join these cuties painting eggs. And did I mention in the game, you don't have to watch ads. I have really been enjoying playing Angry Birds Dream Blast in the evenings after work when I'm trying to wind down and de-stress, or even when I'm taking a quick break from work. Obviously, the topics that I research for this channel can be quite heavy and intense, so I do find that taking regular breaks and just taking my mind off of the cases for a short while by playing Angry Birds Dream Blast is really beneficial. So why not give it a try yourself? Angry Birds Dream Blast is available on both iOS and Android devices, and you can download it right now by clicking the link in my description box or scanning the QR code that is on the screen. And if you go through my link or my QR code, then you'll get 200 coins to spend in the game. You're welcome. Thank you so much once again to Angry Birds Dream Blast for sponsoring this video and supporting the channel, and thank you to all of you guys watching for always showing your support to the sponsors that we work with on this channel. And now let's just get into the case. So for this week's case, we are going back nearly 4 decades now to early 1986 in Van Nuys, which is a neighborhood in the city of Los Angeles in the state of California in the US. And this is Sherri Ray Rasmussen. She was a 29-year-old woman who lived in Los Angeles with her husband. So just for a bit about her, Sherri Rasmussen was born on the 7th of February 1957 to her parents Nels and Loretta Rasmussen. She was originally from a city called Walla Walla in Washington state, although she was raised in Arizona. Sherri was one of 3 children, one of 3 daughters, of which she was the middle child. She had an older sister named Connie and a little sister named Teresa. And it would appear as though Sherri had a nice, normal, happy childhood. She was described as being a very sporty and athletic young girl growing up. She was always very tall and beautiful, and she was incredibly intelligent too, very, very academic. She always did very well in school, got top grades. In fact, she actually skipped 2 whole grades in school. That's how smart she was. And her big sister Connie recalled how when Sherri was just in kindergarten, I mean, she was barely even a student. Her teachers literally used to use her as more of an assistant to help the other kids, her peers, with their work, because she was just always so advanced academically. And so in her teens, by the time she was just 16 years old, Sherri was already enrolled in university. She attended the Loma Linda University in Southern California, where she began studying nursing. She had decided that that was what she wanted to do with her life. She wanted to become a nurse and help people. Following her graduation, she started working towards her master's degree, and alongside this, she got a job working in the UCLA Medical Center's coronary care unit. And it was around this same time that Sherri's parents, Nels and Loretta, actually bought her own condo. You see, they were concerned about her living in California on her own, so they brought her this condo in a gated community in the Van Nuys neighborhood of Los Angeles, and she had her own private drive-in garage so that Sherri wouldn't have to walk back to her apartment alone late at night after her shifts at the medical center. She could just drive back and straight into her own garage. They were concerned about her safety, understandably, as parents to a young woman. Sherri very quickly progressed in her career as a nurse. She was actually soon assigned the role of head nurse at the UCLA coronary care unit. She also became an assistant clinical professor of nursing, whereby she would teach new students, she would give presentations and teach lectures, etc. And at just 27 years old, she was offered a job as being the director of nursing at the Glendale Adventist Medical Center, which is where she was working at the time that this case occurred. I mean, as you can gather, she was incredibly successful work-wise. She was so well liked and respected in her job. She really had built this amazing career for herself. She'd worked so very hard to get to where she was. And things weren't only incredibly positive for Sherri Rasmussen career-wise. By the time she was around her mid-20s, things were also looking very exciting in her personal life too, her love life, as that was when she met the man that would go on to become a big part of her world. In the summer of 1984, so again when Sherri was around 27 years old, she attended this Roaring 20s themed party, and it was there where she met and got chatting to a man named John Rutten. John was a couple of years younger than Sherri. I think he was around 25 when they met, and he also seemed to have a very successful career. He was also a UCLA graduate, and he now worked as a mechanical engineer, and the two, John and Sherri, seemed to very quickly hit it off. John thought that Sherri was just beautiful and brilliant. They shared a lot of hobbies and interests. John was also very sporty and athletic, just like Sherri, so they both enjoyed going jogging and playing tennis together, and they soon became an item. They started dating. They had what people described as being a whirlwind romance. They just fell head over heels for each other, and their relationship progressed very quickly. In fact, just the year after they met, in November of 1985, John and Sherri tied the knot. They got married, and they started living together in Sherri's condo, I believe, in Van Nuys. John moved in with his new wife, and they just seemed incredibly happy together. They were described as having a, quote, true love story. To an outsider, it didn't really seem like they had any major issues in their relationship. They just appeared to be perfect for each other. As we know, they were both very successful in their careers, and they were just getting started on building their lives together. They were settling into married life, and I'm sure looking forward to their future, possibly even looking to start a family of their own at some point soon. However, tragically, the future was something that Sherri Rasmussen would never get to see. Married life for her would barely even begin, as just 3 months after she and John said "I do," she became the victim of an absolutely shocking and vicious crime. The date was the 24th of February 1986. It was a Monday, and that Monday morning, Sherri Rasmussen was due to be at work. Apparently, she was due to be supervising this human resources class that morning and giving a motivational speech. But in all honesty, she wasn't really feeling it. She wasn't feeling 100%. According to sources, she'd strained a muscle in her back while she was doing some aerobic exercises the day before. And so she actually decided to call in sick and just take the day off, have a bit of a rest day at home, whilst her husband John went off to work as normal. So John said goodbye to his wife and he left their condo at around 7:20 8:30 a.m, of course just expecting to see her again later that day when he returned home. Now at around midday, John decided to check in with his wife, check how she was feeling. He rang their telephone, however he got no answer. Sherri didn't pick up, and so thinking that perhaps Sherri had decided to go into work after all, he rang her work telephone. But when Sherri's secretary picked up, she informed John that no, Sherri hadn't come in. She had called in sick that day. So John tried to call their house phone a couple of more times that afternoon, but again there was no answer. The phone was just ringing and ringing and ringing. I mean, it seems strange that she wasn't picking up considering that she was just at home, but it doesn't appear as though alarm bells started necessarily ringing for John straight away. You know, like I said, Sherri wasn't feeling 100%, so maybe she just spent the day napping in bed or something and so didn't hear the phone ring. So John didn't really feel the need to rush home or anything. After his shift ended, he left his work and he went to run a few errands. He went to a UPS store, he picked up some laundry, etc, etc, and then he finally arrived back to his and Sherri's condo in Van Nuys shortly before 6 p.m. that evening. But immediately upon returning, John did become very concerned. You see, he pulled his car up to his and Sherri's private driving garage, and oddly he noticed that the garage door was open and that Sherri's car was gone. She had this silver coloured BMW and yeah, it wasn't in the garage, which seemed bizarre considering that Sherri was just going to be home all day. And then John noticed that as well as the car being gone, there were also what looked like little shards of glass on the pavement by the entrance to the garage. So obviously confused, John quickly made his way inside their condo to check if everything was okay, and as soon as he walked inside, he made a horrific discovery. He walked through the door and the first thing that he saw was his wife, Sherri. She was lying on the floor in the living room covered in blood and she wasn't moving. And John said that he just knew straight away that she was gone. His wife Sherri was dead. She'd been savagely murdered in her own home. And so John immediately called 911, immediately called the police. So police were dispatched to the scene. A homicide investigation was quickly launched by the LAPD, the Los Angeles Police Department, and detectives began piecing together this crime. What exactly had happened to Sherri Rasmussen? So as I said, she was found lying on the floor in the living room. She was lying on her back. She was actually still wearing her night clothes, her pajamas, suggesting that perhaps she had been killed much earlier that day in the morning because she hadn't even had a chance to have gotten changed yet. And the fact that she was in her night clothes also indicated that she wasn't expecting company. She wasn't expecting whoever killed her to come over. As I said, she was covered in blood, where it was soon determined that she'd been both shot with a gun and also beaten. She'd sustained blunt force trauma injuries to the face. Her face was covered in bruises and swollen from where, yeah, she'd been beaten around the head viciously. Apparently the perpetrator had also smashed a vase from the home over her head. The broken vase was found near to her body, and she'd also been beaten with a gun. She'd been pistol whipped, but ultimately it was the gunshot wounds that had killed her. She'd been shot 3 times in the chest, with the bullets hitting her lungs, her spine and her heart. And actually it was found that she'd been shot through this quilt or blanket. The perpetrator placed this quilt from the home over Sherri's chest, and then they fired the gun at her through it, perhaps in an attempt to quieten the noise of the gunshots so as not to alarm the neighbours. And it was later established that the gun that had been used to shoot Sherri was a .38 caliber revolver, although no murder weapon was found at the scene, so clearly the killer had taken that away with them. Upon looking around the scene, around the condo, the police could see clear signs of a violent struggle. As I said, there was a smashed vase, broken glass all over the floor, furniture was toppled over, there was blood everywhere, there was even a blood trail and a bloody handprint next to this burglar panic alarm near the front door of the home, suggesting that Sherri had tried to make a run for it. Sherri herself was was covered in self-defense injuries. 2 of her fingernails had been ripped off and she had a lot of bruises from where she had very clearly tried to fight back, tried to defend herself. And I mean, it was clear that she had put up one hell of a fight against the perpetrator. As we know, Sherri was a tall, athletic, sporty young woman, so she would have fought hard to save her own life. And in fact, another injury that Sherri sustained suggested to the authorities that at one point during the attack, Sherri may have actually been winning this fight. You see, she actually had a bite mark on her body. She had been bitten on the inner part of her left forearm. So the police's theory as to what happened was that Sherri was confronted by the attacker, she was threatened with the gun, a violent struggle ensued between them, and shots were being fired around the apartment during the struggle. Apparently one of the window frames had been shot at, causing the glass to shatter. And it's possible that during the struggle, Sherri may have been able to wrestle the gun off of the attacker. Like I said, it's thought that she may have been winning the fight. And so to prevent that, the attacker grabbed her arm and bit down hard. And as Sherri probably, stumbled around after sustaining this injury, that was when she was bashed over the head with the vase, possibly knocking her unconscious. And then the attacker grabbed the quilted blanket and shot Sherri through it 3 times in the chest, killing her instantly. Now, as far as motive, one presented itself to the detectives pretty quickly. It looked like this was a robbery. Although there were no signs of forced entry to the home, it did look like the condo had been ransacked. There was a load of electrical equipment, like the stereo from the home and video equipment, almost stacked up at the bottom of the staircase by the front door, as if someone was about to take it. Sherri's purse was missing. We know that her car, her BMW, was missing from the garage, so this really did look like a burglary gone wrong. Sherri was murdered because she disturbed a burglar or burglars as they were trying to rob her condo. Just as a side note, Sherri's car was actually later found. It was found abandoned about a mile away from the condo with the keys still inside. So the killer hadn't taken it very far. Maybe it had just been used as like a getaway vehicle or something. Her purse was also located, I believe, prior to Sherri's body being found, actually. The purse was discovered by some members of the public who were working nearby. They just found it discarded on the ground near the condo. But although this looked like a robbery, apart from the purse and the car, which were quickly found, it was determined that the only other thing actually missing from the home was John and Sherri's marriage license, oddly enough. Sherri's jewellery box and the electrical equipment was still in the condo, like I said, but yeah, their marriage license was nowhere to be found. But one of the main reasons why the police held that belief that yes, this was a burglary gone wrong was because there'd actually been a lot of other burglaries in the area around the same time as Sherri's murder, so they believed that they were connected. So following the launch of the murder inquiry, the police appealed to the public for information. A reward for information was put forward, and composite sketches of 2 possible suspects were released to the media, and these sketches were created with the help of witnesses involved in the other burglary offences that had happened nearby. Of course, the police did also look at the people in Sherri's close circle as possibly being the killer, in particular her husband John Rutter, but he was very quickly ruled out when it was determined that his alibi was rock solid. It could be confirmed that he was at work at the time that Sherri was killed, and I mean, John was just distraught when he found his wife murdered. Like I mentioned, they'd been married for literally just 3 months, so I can imagine that they were still in that little bubble of happiness after tying the knot, and then it just suddenly burst when Sherri was brutally killed. He was heartbroken. And unfortunately, as far as other suspects in the case, well, the police didn't really have any, and they started to really struggle with this investigation. I mean, they didn't really have much to go on. Obviously, Sherri was killed in 1986 when DNA science was barely a thing, and so tragically, as the weeks and the months passed by, the murder of Sherri Rasmussen remained unsolved and ultimately ended up going cold. Sherri's family, her friends, and her husband John had to live with the pain of not only not having Sherri in their lives anymore, but also of not knowing who had done this to her, not seeing that person or people face justice for her horrific death. Months without answers turned into years, and years eventually turned into more than a decade and a half. About 18 years passed by by with virtually no movement in the case whatsoever. But then, 18 years after the crime, in 2004, and that was when Sherri's cold case was effectively reopened by a cold case team of detectives, a cold case unit which had recently been set up by the LAPD. They dug out Sherri's case file, started going through it, going through all of the facts, all of the statements, all of the evidence, hoping that the advancements in DNA and forensic technology that they now had in 2004 might be able to finally bring them one step closer to identifying Sherri's killer. Because they did have swabs to test. If you recall, Sherri had a bite mark on her inner left forearm which had been left by the killer. So during her autopsy back in 1986, swabs of this bite mark were taken in the hopes that they might be able to pick up some of the perpetrator's saliva. Obviously, again, they couldn't really do anything with this evidence, these swabs, at the time due to the limitations in forensic science, but now in 2004/2005 they could finally send them off to the lab for testing. The tests ultimately revealed two different blood types, two different DNA profiles. One was obviously the victim's, Sherri's, and the other was her killer's. They had the killer's DNA profile. However, when it was entered onto the CODIS system, the National DNA Database, unfortunately, there were no matches. So either the murderer had never committed another crime before, or at least they'd never been caught for a crime that they'd committed, never been convicted, and their DNA sample taken. However, despite this dead end, scientists did inform the police of another discovery that they'd made when conducting these tests. A discovery that would quite honestly shock the detectives and completely changed the whole course, the whole trajectory of this investigation. Scientists informed the police that testing on the swabs from the bite mark actually revealed that the killer was a woman. It was the DNA of a female. And like I said, this was shocking to the detectives. It was a bombshell. All these years they believed that the murderer was a male burglar or burglars. I don't think they'd even considered the possibility that a woman might have been responsible for this crime. So they'd never really bothered to look into any of the women in Sherri's life. Everything they ever believed about this case was now proven to be false. Not just the fact that the killer wasn't a male, but also the whole burglary theory itself. The detectives in the original investigation back in the 80s were so convinced, so adamant that this was the case of a burglary gone wrong. But now that the cold case team knew that the perpetrator was not a man, it made them start to doubt that too, because again, usually burglaries tend to be carried out by men. I mean, maybe it was a man and a woman burglary duo, a team. I guess that was a possibility, but also upon looking back at the actual facts of the case, they realised that there were quite a few aspects of this crime that didn't make sense for this to be a burglary. Firstly, as we know, there were no signs of forced entry to the condo, which suggested that Sherri may have let the killer into her home, perhaps indicating that they were someone that she knew, they weren't a stranger to her. But secondly, and obviously the biggest problem with the burglary gone wrong theory, was that, like I mentioned earlier, practically nothing was actually stolen from the home. As we know, Sherri's jewellery box was still in the condo, the stereo and some computer equipment was stacked up at the bottom of the staircase. It looked like it was about to be stolen, but it wasn't in the end. Yes, Sherri's car and her purse were taken, but they were soon found abandoned nearby. As we discussed earlier, oddly, the only thing that actually appeared to be missing was Sherri and John's marriage licence, but that was it. The condo was ransacked for sure, but now it was starting to look like that was done on purpose, perhaps. Maybe the crime scene was staged. The killer, whoever she was, wanted to make it look like this was a robbery gone wrong when it wasn't. But also just the injuries that had been inflicted on Sherri themselves didn't suggest that this was a robbery gone wrong. She had been viciously beaten around the head, shot 3 times and bitten on the arm. The amount of injuries that she sustained suggested a much more personal element to this crime, especially the bite mark. I mean, to bite down on someone's arm, to cause them that amount of pain using your own teeth, that strongly indicates a deep level of hatred here. The perpetrator felt rage towards the victim, towards Sherri. Now, surprisingly, following the discovery discovery of the DNA pointing to a female killer, it actually seems as though Sherri's case was kind of put on the back burner for a while, a couple of years. According to one or two sources, this was mainly because the lead detective in the investigation by the early 2000s, Detective Cliff Shepard, was actually taken off of the case and put onto an active serial killer case that the LAPD were investigating at the time. So yeah, for a few more years, Sherri's case remained at a bit of a standstill until around 2008/2009, when Van Nuys homicide detective Jim Nuttall took over Sherri's case file, and he too believed that this murder was staged by the killer as a burglary gone wrong to throw the police off in the initial investigation. Particularly because, going back to the stereo equipment that had been stacked at the bottom of the stairs by the front door, something that caught Detective Nuttall's attention in the case file was that traces of Sherri's blood were found on this stereo, indicating that she must have already been dead, must have already been killed by the time the stereo was taken and stacked by the staircase. It was one of the last things that the killer did in the condo, so why would the perpetrator have done that? Stack the equipment by the door and then not have actually taken it as they were leaving? Well, look, again, it seems obvious, doesn't it, that that was done in a deliberate attempt to stage the scene. So anyway, Detective Nuttall got started on his own investigation into Sherri's murder alongside a team of other detectives, and they started looking into all of the women in Sherri's life, trying to identify anyone who may have had a motive for wanting Sherri dead. And there were a couple of women that they started taking a closer look at, but there was one in particular that really began to stand out from the rest. The reason being because many people in Sherri's close circle had actually reported this woman to the police back in '86 in the original investigation as someone that they should be looking at as a suspect. In fact, Sherri's own parents themselves, Nels and Loretta Rasmussen, had pleaded with the original detectives numerous times to look into this one woman because she had been causing Sherri a lot of trouble and stress in the lead up to her murder. That woman was named Stephanie Lazarus. But who was Stephanie Lazarus? What relation did she have to Sherri? Well, it turns out that she was more so linked to Sherri's husband, John Rutten. She was kind of an ex-girlfriend of John Rutten's, actually. The two of them met in the late 70s, early 80s, when they were both students at the University of California. As we know, John studied mechanical engineering, and I believe Stephanie Lazarus studied sociology and political science. From what I can gather, they both lived in the same university halls, they became good friends, and eventually, somewhat more than friends, they began having a sexual relationship too. Or at least that's how John Rutten viewed it. He seemed to kind of view his relationship with Stephanie Lazarus as being pretty casual, more a kind of friends with benefits type situation. Over the years, the two of them were kind of on again, off again. They would meet up every now and again and sleep together, and that was it really. He never really thought of her as his girlfriend as such, whereas Stephanie Lazarus seemed to view the relationship very, very differently. It was clear that she developed feelings for John Rutten, deep feelings. She fell in love with him and she considered him her boyfriend. Apparently she would tell people that he was her college boyfriend. She was completely infatuated and obsessed with John Rutten. John Rutten would go on to claim that he and Stephanie probably slept together maybe between 20 to 30 times, and that this casual relationship continued even after they both graduated from the UCLA. But then of course it came to an end when John met Sherri Rasmussen in the summer of 1984 at that Roaring Twenties party, and he fell head over heels in love with her. He realised that he'd found the woman that he wanted to be with for the rest of his life. And as we know, John and Sherri quickly married in November of 1985, much to the dismay of Stephanie Lazarus. She was heartbroken, devastated when John began a relationship with Sherri because, again, she was so obsessed with him. So the thought of him being with anyone else, I mean, she just could not cope with it. And she would write about her heartbreak in her journals and her diaries. I do have a couple of quotes from her diary entries here in which she writes about John and Sherri's relationship. relationship. So when she discovered that they had gotten engaged, she wrote, quote, "I really don't feel like working. I found out that John is getting married. My concentration is like -10. Apparently, Stephanie Lazarus also wrote a letter to John's own mother about how she couldn't get over John, in which she said, quote, "I'm truly in love with John and the past year has really torn me up. I wish it didn't end the way it did and I don't think I'll ever understand his decision." But Stephanie Lazarus didn't just keep these feelings to herself, to her diaries, or I guess to John's mother. She made them known to John and his new girlfriend slash fiance, Sherri, too. In fact, apparently when John and Sherri got engaged, Stephanie Lazarus approached John Rutten and she asked him to sleep with her one more time before he got married to give her some closure, which unbelievably he did. John Rutten has admitted that he did sleep with Stephanie whilst he was engaged to Sherri. He cheated on her. According to sources, he did end up confessing this to Sherri and she decided to forgive him and stay with him and still marry him. And of course it did not give Stephanie any form of closure. The obsession with John Rutten still continued to the point where she kind of started stalking the couple. I think she began watching them and following them, just turning up to their condo unannounced, trying to see John. And Sherri's parents, Nels and Loretta, even told the police about one occasion where Stephanie Lazarus confronted Sherri at her place of work about her relationship with John. This happened in 1985, so just the year before Sherri was killed. One day she was just at work as usual at the medical centre when all of a sudden Stephanie Lazarus stormed in. Like I said, she confronted Sherri, started arguing with her about John. Sources state that she was saying things to Sherri like she would, quote, "be there to pick up the pieces when her and John's marriage failed." And apparently this argument escalated and started to turn slightly physical. Stephanie turned physical to the point where the security at the hospital actually had to be called to force Stephanie Lazarus to leave the building. And apparently as she was leaving, as she was escorted out, Stephanie said to Sherri words to the effect of, quote, "if I can't have John, no one else will, including you." And this interaction, this fight slash argument, was witnessed by another member of hospital staff, Sherri's secretary, in fact, I believe. Stephanie just wouldn't leave John or Sherri alone to get on with their lives. Like I said, she was essentially stalking them, which clearly made Sherri feel very, very uncomfortable and probably scared, and she would confide these feelings to her family, to her parents. Hence why when their daughter was later murdered in February of 1986, they kept pressing the detectives to please look into Stephanie Lazarus, just in case there was any chance she could have been involved in this crime. But as we know, they never really did, because they were so fixed on the theory that the perpetrator was a man and that this was a burglary gone wrong. But perhaps there may have also been another big factor as to why Stephanie Lazarus was never really considered a suspect in this case in the very beginning. You see, when the new team of detectives began looking into her in 2009 as part of their cold case review into Sherri's homicide, they were shocked to discover that Stephanie Lazarus was actually one of them. She was a police officer herself, an officer with the Los Angeles Police Department. Following her graduation from the UCLA in the early 80s, Stephanie enrolled into the police academy with the LAPD. So by 2009, she'd been a police officer for well over 2 decades. I think she was in her mid-20s at the time that this case occurred, and she was around like 48, 49 by 2009. She was also married and she had a family. She was a mother, and to be honest, she'd always had a very, very good reputation within the police force. She was always very respected by her colleagues and she'd really risen up the ranks. I think she'd been in several different positions and roles within the police force over the years. She'd worked on street crime and drug abuse. She'd even been a detective. She'd worked in the commercial crimes division, but by 2009 she was an LAPD officer officer specializing in forgery and theft of art. That was her kind of area. And yeah, for the most part, it appears as though she'd always had a very good rapport with her fellow officers. So in 2009, when the detectives working on Sherri Rasmussen's cold case came across Stephanie Lazarus and they learned that she was a serving LAPD officer, like I said, they were absolutely stunned, and they realized that they now had to investigate one of their own as a potential suspect in a 23-year-old murder mystery, which, as you can imagine, is a very, very tricky thing to do for detectives, to investigate one of their own. It was something that had to be incredibly top secret. They could not risk any other officers finding out that Lazarus was being looked into. They couldn't risk her finding out or being tipped off. Number one, because if she was innocent, if she had nothing to do with this crime, then they didn't want her good reputation as an LAPD officer to be put in jeopardy. That wouldn't be fair. But equally, on the other hand, if she was guilty, if she was the one who killed Sherri, they couldn't risk her finding out because, you know, there's every chance that she could try and go on the run or hurt someone else. I mean, she was in the police force. She did have a gun. Speaking of Stephanie Lazarus's gun, actually, so when she was identified as a suspect in 2009 and detectives began looking for evidence which actually linked her to the crime, they started delving into police records from 1986, when obviously this case occurred, and they found that back then Stephanie Lazarus had two .38 caliber revolver guns registered to her. They were the guns that were issued to LAPD officers at the time, and if you remember, this was the exact type of weapon that had been used to shoot and kill Sherri Rasmussen, a .38 caliber revolver. And apparently the reason that she had two of these weapons, was because she reported the first one as having been stolen very shortly after Sherri's murder, and so she purchased the second one literally just 10 days after Sherri was killed. Doesn't seem like a coincidence, does it? Was the first gun really stolen, or did Stephanie get rid of it after she murdered Sherri using it, if she did murder Sherri? As well as that, the detectives also began looking at what kind of shifts Stephanie was on around the time of the murder. They looked into those records and they found that she hadn't been working in the days prior to the murder and on the day of the murder itself. So it seemed like she would have had opportunity to carry out this crime. So the case was really starting to build here. Detectives really started to think, okay, yes, Stephanie Lazarus really is looking like a very, very viable suspect. They had a top suspect in this case finally after more than 2 decades, but they didn't have enough to make an arrest. The only evidence they had against Stephanie Lazarus at this point in time was nothing more than circumstantial. They needed more proof if they were going to obtain an arrest warrant. What they needed was DNA. They needed Stephanie Lazarus's DNA to be able to compare against the DNA profile of Sherri's killer, the profile that had been obtained from the saliva swabs taken from the bite mark on Sherri's arm. Now, they didn't have Stephanie's DNA on record anywhere. She'd obviously never been convicted of a crime, and they didn't want to just go ahead and ask her for a DNA sample because, I mean, again, they didn't want to risk her finding out that she was being looked at as a suspect in this case. And so detectives decided that they were going to try and secretly get a DNA sample from Stephanie Lazarus without her knowing. They put her under surveillance, and one day when she wasn't on duty, wasn't working, they followed her to this warehouse store where they witnessed her purchasing a soda drink, which she started drinking through a straw. And once she finished with this drink and threw the soda and the straw in the bin, the surveillance team quickly collected it. They got the soda can and the straw back out of the bin, and they immediately sent it off to the lab for testing. Scientists were able to extract Stephanie's saliva from the straw, and when it was compared against the DNA profile of Sherri's killer, bingo. It was a match. It was her bite mark on Sherri's arm. It was Stephanie Lazarus, this LAPD officer that had murdered Sherri Rasmussen all those years ago. So armed with this evidence, the detectives decided to move in and interrogate Stephanie Lazarus. They were going to question her about this crime, but they needed to go about this very, very carefully because they didn't want her guard to be up or for her to really suspect anything straight away. They decided that they were going to question Stephanie in a specific area in the department headquarters of the LAPD police building, because in this area no one was allowed to be armed. All police officers would have to give over their weapons before they entered. Obviously they couldn't risk this now murder suspect going into what would be an interrogation with her gun, so if they interviewed her in this part of the building, she would have no choice but to surrender her gun, and she wouldn't think anything of it because all other officers would have to do the same. And the detectives also decided to lie to Stephanie initially. To get her into the interview room, they approached her and basically acted as if they needed her assistance with this stolen art case that they were investigating, which of course was fake. There was no stolen art case. But again, so as not to arouse her suspicion, they made up that they needed her help with this stolen art crime, which, as we know, is what she specialised in as an LAPD officer. So yeah, they did just that. On the 5th of June 2009, they approached Stephanie Lazarus, asked for her assistance, she agreed, and she came to the interrogation room, thinking that she was going to be interviewing someone herself about this stolen art. She was none the wiser that in fact she was the one who was about to be interviewed. Now, the video of Stephanie Lazarus's full interrogation is actually available to watch online. I'm not going to play it in this video just because it is over an hour long, well over an hour long, so I'm just going to try and play a couple of clips for you. But if you do want to watch the full interview yourself, then I will leave a link to it in the description box because it is very, very interesting. But yeah, like I said, I will play a couple of clips for you now.
Stephanie, I don't know if you know my partner.
Hey, hi.
Hi. Sure, nice to meet you.
See you guys.
How's it going?
Good.
Milling around. Well, have a seat. What this is, I didn't want to bring this up in your squadron. Oh, no, it's fine. I think we're good.
You're going to bring somebody in, right?
Yeah, well, I can explain the whole thing. I don't want to talk about this in the squadron because I don't know who people are listening. And if we go to my side, everybody's always wondering what everybody else is doing. Okay. But like we're talking about being busy and stuff, we've been assigned a case that we've been looking at. Okay. It's a new case, and reviewing the case, there's some notes to see as far as your name being mentioned.
Okay.
Do you know John Rutten?
John Rutten? John Rutten?
Rutten.
Oh yeah, I went to school with him.
You did?
Yeah.
How long did you know him?
Gosh, I went to school in, let's see, went to UCLA in 1978 I started, and, you know, met him at school at the dorms.
Were you guys friends, close friends?
Yeah, we're very close friends. I mean, what's this all about?
Well, it's regarding, it's a case we're working on. It involves John, and in there, some of the statements we reviewed, you know, there's notes and stuff that he knew you and stuff.
Oh yeah, I mean, we were good friends. Lived in the dorms for 2 years.
You guys lived in the same dorm?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, Dykstra.
Okay. Were you guys just friends or anything else, or?
Yeah, we were good friends.
Yeah. Was there ever any relationship or anything that developed between you guys?
Yeah, I mean, we dated. You know, I mean. What's this all about?
Well, it's relating to his wife.
Okay.
Okay. Did you know her?
Not really. I mean, I knew that he got married years ago.
Did you ever meet her?
God, I don't know.
Do you know who she was or anything?
Well, let me think. God, it's been a long time ago. I may have met her. Geez. You know.
Yeah. Well, let me ask you. You said you dated John. How long did you guys date?
I mean, well, are you guys? Is this something? I mean, you said I was going to interview somebody about art, and how you guys are. Here's. I mean,
Stephanie, here's the situation. It's basically, we knew that this when we saw this in this chrono that maybe there was some relationship there. That's what the chrono seemed to indicate, and we didn't want to come up to you at your desk and ask those kinds of questions or do anything. You know how up there people can see what's going on if you go into an interview room or people are in there getting supplies.
Okay. I mean,
so we wanted to afford you some privacy, some confidentiality
Okay.
to talk about this, because we thought it might be, something, you're married to someone else, obviously, and so forth, and that you may not want to, talk about these things in that setting where someone, we don't want the rumor mill or gossip or any of that kind of stuff
I
to
mean,
start.
that's fine. I mean,
So we did this just as a means to try and speak to you in just
Okay,
a
I mean, I
confidential
just-
place where where your business isn't out there for other people in
well, I mean,
your
it's-
division to
yeah,
know
I
about.
mean, God, that's been a million years ago. I mean, what year is it now? 2009? I mean, I graduated in 82. 82, yeah. We dated. I dated other guys. I'm sure he dated other girls.
And you haven't talked to him for a long time?
Oh, I think I haven't talked to him in a long time. I couldn't even tell you when the last time I talked to him. I mean, what's this all about? I mean,
Well, let me ask you, what ended the relationship between you and John?
it was kind of a weird relationship. I mean, we dated. I can't say that he was my boyfriend. I don't know that he would consider me his girlfriend. I don't understand why you're talking about some guy I dated a million years ago.
Well, do you know what happened to his wife?
Yeah, I know she got killed.
Were you on the job back then when that happened?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I'm sure I was on the job. That's why I would have heard about it.
You said you thought his wife was a nurse. Do you have any idea where she was working at the time, or did he ever mention that to you? Was it a hospital or a doctor's office?
I'm sure he must have mentioned it. Now that you're bringing that up, I think she worked at a hospital somewhere. And yeah, I may have met her at a hospital. I may have talked to her once or twice.
Was everything okay between you guys? I mean, there was never anything uncomfortable or anything between you and her?
I don't know. I mean, it's been so many years. I mean, uncomfortable. I mean, I can't even remember if we had a conversation. I mean,
Do you know what the circumstances were regarding her death?
Geez, let me think back. I don't know if it was, if it was a burglary or something. Yeah, it's been so many years. I can faintly think that I may have saw a flyer.
You remember the first name?
Sherri, I don't know, something maybe, like I said, it's been so many years.
You mentioned a hospital, maybe. You may have talked to her at a hospital.
Yeah, I may have, I'm thinking back now, you guys are bringing up all these whole memories.
No, it kind of dusts off the cuff.
Geez. I'm thinking that, because, we would date, he would date other people, I would date other people.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, at one point, he may have been dating her, or I don't know, maybe he was married, I don't even remember. And I'm like, why are you calling me if you're either dating her or living with her or married to her? Because I honestly don't remember the time frame.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, come on, knock it off. And now I'm thinking I may have gone to her and say, hey, you know what? Is he dating you? He's bothering me. And so I'm thinking that we had a conversation about that.
When you said, like, hey, he's calling me, he needs to knock it off, or what have you, was that civil? Was there,
No, there was not. I don't think there was anything. The conversation lasted a few minutes. I can't even remember. And what is it like, we went out to lunch or anything.
Right, but there was no, like, arguments or fights,
I
or
don't think
it didn't
so.
get heated or anything like
Not
that?
that I recall, no.
But you didn't have any problems with her then?
No.
You didn't have any issues with her?
No, I'm...
Looking at some of the notes, some of Sherri's friends said that you and her were having a problem because of the John situation.
Well...
That's what I'm reading, is that you guys had problems with each other and words are being exchanged, and it's all relating to John.
You know what? I can't say.
You can't say?
No, that doesn't even ring a bell.
Like I said, as we were looking at the case, and, we had read the notes as far as from Sherri's friends saying you guys had problems or words, and they got heated. And the reason we're asking you is they had mentioned that an incident at her work had occurred, and they've also told us that an incident at her house occurred.
You know what?
And this is at her house during the period of time that they're married.
That's just not sounding familiar at all. You know what? That's just not sound. Again, if someone says that I was at her house and I had an incident with her, that just doesn't sound. Was John there? Did John say this happened? Because, and other people were there. I don't recall.
Did you ever fight with her?
You mean like we fought?
Yeah. Did you ever duke it out with her?
No, I don't think so. I mean,
you'd remember that, right? That would be pretty.
Yeah, I would think so. I mean,
specific.
Yeah, like I said, I mean,
dramatic.
obviously, it just doesn't sound familiar. I mean, what are they saying? So I fought with her. So now I getting the jump, the leap. Excuse me, I haven't eaten. They're saying, okay, I fought with her, so I must have killed her. I mean, come on. I mean, that I don't even know who these people are. I can't even say I met any of these people. I mean, it's insane.
As they processed everything, they did the best they could at that time, and they looked at a lot of people and different things in this case. And you're right.
I mean, if you guys are claiming that I'm a suspect, then I got a problem with that. Okay. So, if you're doing this as an interrogation, you're saying, hey, I'm a suspect. Well, now I got a problem with, now you're accusing me of this? Is that what you're saying?
We're trying to figure out what happened, Stephanie.
Well, I'm just saying, do I need to get a lawyer if you're accusing me of this? You
don't have to. I mean, you're here of your own free will. I mean,
I know, but
you're not under arrest. You can walk out.
You can leave whenever you like.
Well, but I'm trying to give you some background of how I knew him, and now you're telling me that somebody's saying that we had this big old fight, and I don't even know what you're talking about. And I don't want to get in trouble for something that I didn't even do, or you're saying I did something.
Okay,
we understand.
The thing is, detectives did what they could at that time on the crime scene. Okay, and the burglary thing you're talking about, that is an angle that they looked at. But now we're looking at everything else on the case. Because nobody was ever arrested on the case.
I don't know that or not.
Okay. Now, what we'd like to do is, obviously about all the DNA stuff and things of the nature that, gets done on cases nowadays. If we asked you for a DNA swab, would you be willing to give us one?
Maybe. Because now I'm thinking I probably need to talk to a lawyer.
Okay.
Because I know how this stuff works. Okay, don't get me wrong. You're right. I have been doing this a long time.
Yeah.
And I wish I had been recording this because now it sounds like there's you're selling these people saying I'm fighting with her, and now it sounds like you're trying to I've been doing this a long time.
Yeah, we know.
Okay. And now it almost sounds like you're trying to pin something on me. No, now I got that sense.
Well, what it gets to on these cases, and you know it as well as I do, our job is to identify and eliminate suspects.
I can't believe this.
So if we ask you to a point to give us a DNA sample, a buccal swab, so we can identify or eliminate you, would you be willing to do that?
Maybe. Because I know this.
Well, that's where we're at too. Because right now, from looking at the evidence, it's possible we may have some DNA at the location.
That's great.
And we're going to do what we can to try to put this thing together. And your name's in the book. These people are pointing at you for whatever reason.
I don't know why. That's just crazy. That's absolutely crazy.
And it would be irresponsible on our part not to look at it.
I know. You guys have to do your job. And I guess I'm going to have to contact somebody. So...
That's fair.
Because I know how this stuff works.
Sure.
I just can't believe it.
We understand that. If we were in your position, we would feel the same way.
I just can't even believe it. It's just, I'm shocked. I'm really shocked that somebody would be saying that I did this. We had a fight, and so I went and killed her. Come on.
Well,
that's...
Okay.
All right.
Well, thanks for giving me the courtesy. I wish I could record it.
Thanks for your time.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, Stephanie. Take care.
All right.
So as you would have just seen, it was complete denial from Stephanie Lazarus. She was acting none the wiser. It was crazy for the detectives to suggest that she could have been responsible for this crime. She was not admitting to anything, and after the interview, she got up to go and leave. Only she didn't get very far at all. Despite her denial, the police had an arrest warrant because of the DNA match. So quickly after she left the interview room, she was arrested just down the hallway on suspicion of the murder of Sherri Rasmussen. She was read her rights following her arrest, and then she was taken into custody and charged with Sherri's homicide.
This is absolutely crazy.
Let's see, Stephanie.
This is insane.
Okay. Give me 1 second. Okay. Stephanie, you know you have the right to remain silent. Do you understand?
Yes.
Anything you say may be used against you in court. Do you understand?
Yes.
You have the right to the presence of an attorney before and during any questioning. Do you understand?
Yes.
When it came to her court proceedings, the denial just continued, and she decided to plead not guilty to the crime, meaning that Stephanie Lazarus was headed to trial. Now, as I'm sure you can imagine, news of Stephanie's arrest spread like wildfire. The media attention on this case was absolutely huge because, I mean, it was unbelievable. The fact that after all these years, after more than 2 decades, there had finally been an arrest in the Sherri Rasmussen killing, and it was none other than an LAPD officer, and a female officer at that. People couldn't believe it. All these years, detectives had been searching for Sherri's killer, and really, the perpetrator was right in front of them the entire time, one of their own. Stephanie Lazarus went to trial in February of 2012, and for the prosecution, it was pretty clear that Stephanie's entire motive for this crime centered around jealousy. We know just how obsessed she was with her ex John Rutten, how she couldn't cope when he started dating and subsequently married Sherri. And I mean, like she said to Sherri when she confronted her in the hospital that day, she decided that if she wasn't going to have John, then she was going to make sure no one else could have him either. And so she made the decision to kill his wife, Sherri. She confronted Sherri at her home whilst John was at work. A violent struggle ensued between them. As we discussed earlier, it's possible that at one point Stephanie may have even been losing the fight, perhaps losing control of the gun, and so to regain control, regain power, she proceeded to bite Sherri's arm. She also beat her around the head with the gun, she smashed a vase over her head, and then of course she shot her to death. She shot Sherri 3 times in the chest. She then started going around the condo, making it look as though it had been ransacked to stage the scene as a burglary. The only thing that she actually stole was John and Sherri's marriage license, which, I mean, now we know who the killer was. Makes sense, doesn't it? I think for years that part of the case really confused the police. When they were adamant that this was a robbery gone wrong, they couldn't understand why a burglar would take a marriage license of all things. But now that we know that the murderer was a jealous ex-lover, it adds up. Now, the defense's argument was to pretty much just insist that this in fact was a burglary. The original detectives were correct. This was the case of a burglary gone wrong, and therefore that didn't fit with Stephanie being the killer. The defense also tried to argue that the bite mark evidence couldn't be relied upon. I believe argued that it was possible that the swabs from the bite mark had been improperly stored over the years and, yeah, therefore couldn't be trusted. But to sum up, the trial lasted for about 6 weeks in total, and in March of 2009, the jury was sent off to deliberate. They deliberated for a couple of days, actually, before eventually returning with their verdict of guilty. They had found 52-year-old Stephanie Lazarus guilty of the 1986 first-degree murder of Sherri Rasmussen. Finally, more than 25 years after the crime, Sherri had gotten justice. At her sentencing, Lazarus received 27 years to life in prison, and it was at her sentencing, I believe, that one of the people who gave a victim impact statement was Sherri's husband, John Rutten. And I do have a couple of quotes from his statement to share with you. He said, "Sherri Rasmussen had a profound impact on so many people, and I was proud that she agreed to be my wife. It was impossible not to notice Sherri when she entered a room. To me, her physical presence was startling, and I can clearly remember the first moment I laid eyes on her. My heart still races when I look at pictures of her, but Sherri was extraordinary, more for who she was than the way she looked. She was a hard worker, professional, a leader, a diplomat, forgiving, tough, and a kid at heart. Sherri's loss, the way she died, and the trial 25 years after her death has had a profound impact on many, many others. The effects are broad and span a generation, creating pain for those whose lives should have never been touched by this tragic event. Words are feeble tools for describing these impacts, but there are so many moments and so very many tears. Your Honour, I'm compelled to end with my feelings towards the Rasmussen family. After meeting Sherri, I couldn't help but notice the central role she played in this fun-loving and down-to-earth family. Niles and Loretta Rasmussen lost much more than a daughter when they lost Sherri. The Rasmussens have treated me like a son and a brother, contemplating their profound grief, and the fact that Sherri's death occurred because she met and married me brings me to my knees. I do not know and fear that I will ever know how to cope with this appalling fact. I have resigned myself to praying for some measure of peace and trying to endure the daydreams about a world where Sherri is still with us and this pointless tragedy never occurred. Now, in the aftermath of this case, Sherri Rasmussen's parents, Niles and Loretta, did actually try to sue the LAPD for their failure to look into Stephanie Lazarus as a suspect pretty much right from the beginning. Because as we talked about earlier, many people in Sherri's circle, including her parents, literally pleaded with them to look into Lazarus because of the issues that Sherri and John had been having with her in the lead up to her death. But these pleas were essentially just ignored. Once again, the detectives were so fixated on the burglary theory that it seems as though they wouldn't even consider the possibility that there may have been another motive behind this crime. They argued that police negligence meant that Sherri's killer was able to remain a free woman for decades after committing such a horrific act, and that there may have even been a cover-up in the force here because the killer herself was a serving police officer. So there was an internal police review, an inquiry launched to investigate these claims further. However, ultimately, the Rasmussens' lawsuit was dismissed because apparently there was no evidence of a cover-up found, and also apparently it was ruled that it was filed too late to satisfy California's statute of limitations, so no police officers ever faced any kind of punishment. As for Stephanie Lazarus, she was sent to serve her sentence in a prison in the city of Corona in California, and she did try to appeal against her conviction just the year after she was found guilty in 2013, but this appeal was rejected and she remained behind bars. However, shockingly, 10 years later, in November of 2023, so just a couple of years ago, a panel of parole board commissioners actually decided that Stephanie Lazarus would become suitable for parole after serving 15 years in prison because apparently she'd been a model inmate, and by 2023 she had finally confessed to her part in this crime. She admitted that yes, she was the one who killed Sherri all those years ago, and she claimed that she was remorseful, that she felt a tremendous amount of guilt for what she had done. And yeah, because she appeared to show remorse and the fact that she'd been a model inmate, it was decided that she no longer posed a risk to society and that she would become eligible for parole after 15 years. However, the governor's office, alongside Sherri's friends and family, requested for the parole board to please review this decision, as understandably they didn't think that it was fair for Stephanie to be released earlier, especially considering the fact that it took her, 11 years after she was convicted to actually finally admit to this crime. You know, she was convicted in 2012 and she didn't confess to killing Sherri until 2023. So how can you be suddenly so remorseful for a crime that you've been protesting you had no part in for well over a decade? Doesn't make sense, does it? So a hearing was set up for the parole board to review their decision, during which they once again heard from Sherri's loved ones who pleaded with the board to reconsider, and they did. In October of 2024, Stephanie Lazarus's parole grant was rescinded. It was cancelled, so she remains locked up to this day. And that is it for this case. That concludes the case of Sherri Rasmussen. A real roller coaster of a case, I feel, and it's honestly infuriating that this crime potentially could have been solved a lot sooner had the police just listened to Sherri's loved ones and looked into Stephanie Lazarus. And I do find it quite unbelievable that no officers ever faced any kind of punishment for that, to be honest. But yeah, that is it for this case. As always, please do let me know your thoughts and opinions on the case case down below in the comments. I would love to hear what you guys think. And also feel free to let me know of any other cases that you would like to see me cover on this channel. Again, you can pop them in the comments below, or alternatively you can go through my case request form, which is always linked in the description box of all of my videos. Thank you all so much for watching. Please do give this video a thumbs up and subscribe if you haven't already, and I will see you again next week for another mystery with Mollie.